Have you ever wondered what happens when someone underestimates a 13-year-old? The millionaire mocked the black cleaning lady's 13-year-old son. Translate that, and my salary will be yours. But what happened next left everyone in absolute shock. Really, Lucia? You brought your son to my house? Veronica Costello's sharp voice echoed through the marble hall of the mansion, making Diego cower behind his mother. The 52-year-old businesswoman, owner of one of the largest construction companies in the country, looked at the 13-year-old boy as if he were an unwanted stain on her Persian rug. Lucia lowered her eyes, nervously squeezing the cleaning cloth between her hands. I'm sorry, Ms. Veronica. The school is on strike, and I had no one to leave Diego with. I promise he won't get in the way. Of course he will, retorted Veronica, walking over to the table where a pile of important documents was scattered. Her Louboutin heels clicked loudly on the floor. Each step a declaration of superiority. Children always get in the way, especially when they don't know their place. Diego remained silent, watching the woman who treated his mother like a disposable object after 4 years of impeccable service. At 13, he had already learned that people like Veronica Costello saw people like them as invisible cogs in a machine that kept their comfortable lives running. Actually, Veronica stopped suddenly, a cruel smile forming on her perfectly painted lips. Maybe your son could be useful for something. She picked up a document from the table and held it up in the air. I have an interesting problem here. My translators are charging a fortune to translate this contract from Japanese, and it's delaying a $50 million deal. The boy frowned, confused as to where this was going. In the adjacent living room, Veronica's other guests, executives, and investors who had come for the business dinner, stopped their conversations to watch the scene unfold. How about a challenge, little girl? Veronica approached Diego, brandishing the document like a weapon. If you can translate this correctly by tomorrow morning, I'll pay you my monthly salary. That's right, $240,000. Explosive laughter echoed through the room. Veronica's guests were greatly amused by what they considered a brilliant joke at the expense of a black kid from the slums. Veronica, you're terrible, laughed Roberto Mendez, owner of a hotel chain. The boy can barely read Portuguese, let alone Japanese. Diego felt his face flush, but not with embarrassment. It was something different, a mixture of determination and something his victims would later call a premonition. He looked at the document in Veronica's hands, then at his mother, who looked like she wanted to disappear. What if I can do it? Diego's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade, instantly silencing all laughter. Veronica blinked, surprised. What do you mean? If I translate the document correctly, will you really pay the 240,000 reis? The millionaire exchanged amused glances with her guests before leaning toward the boy as if talking to a particularly slow child. Sure, dear. When pigs fly and you learn Japanese, I'll pay you. In fact, I'll do better than that. If you succeed, in addition to the money, I'll give you a recommendation to the best private school in town. What none of them noticed was the different gleam that passed through Diego's dark eyes at that moment. It wasn't despair or fear, but something much more dangerous for those who underestimate others. It was the absolute calm of someone who had just been given exactly the opportunity he had been waiting for. Want to know how this 13-year-old turned the tables? Stay tuned to Black Voices for the full story. Diego's firm response echoed through the hall like an unexpected challenge, turning what should have been just another humiliation into something different. Veronica blinked several times, clearly not expecting a kid from the slums to have the courage to respond directly to her cruel provocation. Do you know what you're talking about, kid? Veronica leaned toward Diego, her voice taking on an even more venomous tone. This document is about Japanese sustainable construction technology. Engineers from prestigious universities are charging 50,000 reis just to take a look at it. Roberto Mendez, still laughing, got up from the Italian leather sofa. Veronica, the boy probably doesn't even know what sustainable technology is. He probably thinks sustainable means when the house doesn't fall down. More laughter exploded throughout the room. Lucia closed her eyes, wishing she could disappear. But Diego remained motionless, observing every face in the room with an attention that should have alerted someone more perceptive. You know what bothers me? Veronica walked over to a bookcase filled with business awards and trophies. It's this habit you have of not knowing your place. Your mother is an excellent employee because she understands perfectly well where she stands in this house. But you, she pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Diego. You clearly need to learn some basic lessons about social hierarchy. What none of them noticed was that while Veronica was lecturing on hierarchy, Diego discreetly photographed the document with his old cell phone, a device he had received as a gift from a school social program, but which served its purpose perfectly. 36 hours, Veronica announced dramatically, consulting her Rolex watch. That's the deadline for the translation. If you really want to play big, let's make this interesting. She addressed the guests with a mischievous smile. How about we bet on it? 100,000 reis each. I bet the boy can't even identify what language it is. You're on. Roberto slammed his fist on the table. That's a piece of cake. Literally, added Patricia Almeida, marketing director for a multinational pharmaceutical company. I'll bet 200,000. I'm absolutely certain that boy has no idea what he's looking at. Diego watched each of them raise their bets against him, memorizing every name, every face, every cruel comment. At 13, he had already learned that powerful people often made their biggest mistakes when they felt invincible. Mom, Diego whispered to Lucia, who was trembling with nervousness. Can you wait for me in the car? I'm just going to get some information about the deadline. Lucia hesitated, but Diego gave her a reassuring look. The same one she saw when he explained complex math problems to older classmates at school or when he helped elderly neighbors with technology that even young adults couldn't understand. After Lucia left, Veronica approached Diego again. Last chance to back out, kid. I won't feel sorry for you when you come back tomorrow crying because you couldn't even read the first line. Can I ask you a question, Mrs. Veronica? Diego kept his voice respectful but firm. You may, if I do translate the document correctly, in addition to the 240,000 reis and the recommendation for the private school, will you publicly apologize to my mother for the 4 years of disrespect? The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica exchanged incredulous glances with her guests. How dare you? Patricia stood up indignantly. How dare you make demands? They're not demands, Diego replied calmly. It's just a question about the consequences of a bet you yourselves proposed. Veronica laughed loudly, but there was something forced about it. Sure, honey, when you fail miserably, and you will, I want you to remember that you had a chance to walk away with your dignity intact. And when I succeed, Diego asked for the second time that night. If you succeed, Veronica emphasized the word if with contempt, I will not only pay what we agreed and apologize publicly, but I will also double the offer. 480,000 reis. The guests laughed even louder. For them, it was impossible that a black kid from the slums could possess knowledge that specialized professionals charged fortunes to apply. Diego nodded one last time and headed for the door. Before leaving, he turned to the group. Just one more question, Mrs. Veronica. Are you sure you want this to be public? Because after I bring the translation tomorrow, a lot of people are going to want to know how this happened. For the first time that night, Veronica hesitated for a split second. But her arrogance spoke louder. Honey, the only audience you should worry about is the social workers who will want to understand why a child is fantasizing so much about his abilities. What those privileged adults couldn't see was that every cruel word they uttered was being carefully filed away in the mind of someone who, at 13, had already learned that the greatest victories come from strategic silence and meticulous preparation. Lessons that would soon turn her night of humiliation into the beginning of the downfall of those who believed that money and status were synonymous with intelligence and superiority. On the way home, Diego remained silent while Lucia drove the Toyota with trembling hands. The tension in the air was palpable, and she finally couldn't contain herself any longer. Diego, for God's sake, what was that? Have you gone mad? Her voice trembled between anger and despair. That woman can fire me. She can destroy us. And now you're going to go there tomorrow and make a fool of yourself trying to translate Japanese. Diego looked out the window, watching the city lights